My name is Randall Eggert. This class is Grammar and Stylistics. It's about writing clearly.
Parts of speech. You know more than you think you do. I expect that most of us, whether it was in elementary school or junior high or high school, received the same sorts of definitions when we were taught parts of speech. So, for example, you were probably taught that a noun is a person, place, or thing, and that a verb is an action word. And these just aren't good definitions. Inevitably, you're going to have a clever student who says, so does that mean in the kitchen is a noun? And the teacher says, oh, no. Kitchen is a noun, but in the kitchen, no, that's not a noun. But the student says, but that's a place. The kitchen's not a place. In the kitchen is a place. Or a clever student says, so what about happiness? Happiness isn't a person, place, or thing, but it's a noun, isn't it? And the teacher says, oh, okay, yeah, emotions. Emotions are nouns too. And then they say, okay, well, thought, is that an emotion then? It's, or idea? And the teacher starts having to expand it. And eventually you expand it so far that listing things like that becomes kind of useless. And then you've got things like entropy. I mean, what do you do with entropy? It's not a thought, it's not an idea, it's not an emotion, it's certainly not a thing or a person or a place, but it's a noun. And then, of course, you've got these action words that are not verbs, like construction. I enjoy watching people build things. So whenever there's construction in my neighborhood or on campus, I like to watch it. And I can tell you, it's very active. It's a very much of an action word, but it's clearly not a verb. So these definitions, they're not good. But there is a definition that I understand a lot of teachers use at that level that I really like. It's the one for preposition. And I don't know, I wasn't taught this way. I was just given a list of prepositions and told to memorize them, which is really useless because I memorized them for the test and then promptly forgot them the next day. But what some students are taught is that a preposition is anything a rabbit can do to a fence. Well, the to do part I'm not so fond of, but what teachers are getting at when they say it this way is they're basically giving us a frame. And anything that can fit in that blank is a preposition. So the rabbit went to the fence. The rabbit went under the fence. The rabbit went up the fence. The rabbit went over the fence. The rabbit went by the fence. The rabbit went along the fence. Those are all prepositions. That is a great test. The reason that's good is because parts of speech have to do with where words fit in sentences. It's not about content. So those earlier definitions, person, place, or thing, or active verb, those are about content. Those are about the meaning of the words. And it doesn't work. That's not the way parts of speech work in language. They work in terms of a kind of block that fits in the right hole. Right? So round blocks go in the round holes, square blocks go in the square holes. That's what verbs, nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and so on, that's what they do. They're filling spots within a frame. I'm going to teach you two of the sexiest words of English. This actually comes from my undergraduate advisor, Bob Hausman. He's the one who told me that these were the two sexiest words of English. You can judge for yourself. The first is syntagmatic. The second is paradigmatic. These are more appropriate tests for parts of speech. A syntagmatic test works like this. It's like that the rabbit went blank the fence. So for example, if we want to look at a noun, we can have a frame like this. The blank is good. The construction is good. The dog is good. The kitchen is good. The entropy is good. For a verb, you can have several blanks because there's different types of verbs. So you can say, they kicked it, they saw it, they licked it. Or it could just be a complete sentence by itself, like they blanked, they ate, they dreamed, they slept. It could also be a verb that introduces a subordinate clause, like they believe that I'm the smartest. They wish that I'm the smart. I guess that doesn't work so well. They wish that I were the smartest would work better. They hope that I'm the smartest. That works well. And then you've got verbs that take another verb after them, like they want to go, they tried to go, they hoped to go. Adjectives generally can come right in front of a noun. Like, for example, the blank thing is good, the tall thing is good, the big thing is good, the wonderful thing is good. Paradigmatic tests are more about the form of the words, and these are more appropriate for other languages. English really doesn't have a lot of paradigms. The only paradigm I can think of for nouns is singular and plural, like dog, dogs, tree, trees, construction, constructions. And that works pretty well. If you can pluralize it, that's a pretty good sign that it's a noun. Although the challenge is that we've got other places or other suffixes, s, that sound identical but are used for different purposes. So, for example, we've got the third person singular present tense suffix is also an s. But for the most part, that isn't a bad test. It's at least evidence that it's a noun. Verbs, it's usually a little bit easier to use this test. If you can conjugate it, then it's going to be a verb. Like be is are, was, were, been, being, or go, go, goes, went, gone, going, or walk, walk, walks, walked, walked, walking. Notice that we've got these repetitions like walked and walked because it's filling two different slots. It's filling the past tense and then the past participle. Adjectives, you've got the comparative like good, better, tall, taller, rose, rosier, and the superlative good, best, tall, tallest, rosy, rosiest. Doesn't work for every adjective, like beautiful. You don't get beautifuler and beautifulest. You get more beautiful, most beautiful. But again, if you can add that er, est to it, that's good evidence that it's an adjective. So using these two together, the syntagmatic tests and the paradigmatic tests, that's a pretty good way to know whether it's a noun, verb, adjective, adverb, preposition, whatever. And part of it is that once we know one item, we can figure out other items. Because if they behave the same way, then they're the same part of speech. And that's where I get into that point that you know more than you think you know. And let me give you an example of this, because this is something we do every day. When we hear a new word, first thing we want to do is figure out what part of speech it is. So you might have heard of the two words I'm going to use as examples. If you have, then try to remember back to when you didn't know what those words were. And if you don't know what these words are, look them up afterwards. They're fun words. So let's say that somebody says egglet, and you hear the egglet. What's that? First impulse that we've got as humans is to look for analogies. So we look for words that seem similar, that have perhaps a similar ending, like eaglet, bracelet, scarlet. Well, the first two are nouns. The last is a adjective. So it doesn't really help us to know whether egglet is a noun or an adjective, but at least it's a start. Well, then we hear that you can add an S to it. We know we can add an S to eaglets and bracelets, but not to scarlets. Okay, well that's good. That suggests that it probably is a noun then, not an adjective. And then finally, if you actually hear it in a sentence, well then you've got a frame. And then you can plug in other things in that frame and see what part of speech they are. So if the person says, I lost one of my egglets, well then you can say, well, let's see, I lost one of my fingers, I lost one of my ideals, I lost one of my shoelaces. So with that in mind, you can see that, what were they? Finger, ideal, shoelace, those are all nouns. So now we've got evidence that egglet is a noun. Now imagine that you heard the word callipygian, which is my favorite word. Well, then again, we think about, well, what sounds similar to it? Epicurean, Hyperborean, Herculean. The first two are typically nouns, Epicurean and Hyperborean, although they can be used as adjectives as well. And then Herculean is almost always used as an adjective. So again, just based on form, we can't be sure whether this is an adjective or a noun until we hear it in a sentence. So being callipygian is just one of J-Lo's assets. So being blank is being tall, is being fast, is being athletic, is being happy, is, right? So in that case, we can see it's got to be an adjective because all of those words that fit in that frame are adjectives. Okay, so that's the idea. And going back to that school teacher's person, place, or thing, or action, verb, not good definitions, but the odd thing about it is they work. And they work because the kids already have the categories. Kids already distinguish between nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs and prepositions and auxiliary verbs and so on. We already have the categories up here in our heads. That's part of our mental grammar. And all that the teacher needs to do is assign a name to each one of those categories. And so all that the teacher is doing by saying person, place, or thing is giving a few good exemplars. Person is a noun. Place is a noun. Thing is a noun. And now we can start using those to expand. And likewise, all you're going to need is a few good verbs to know what verbs are. If you know that kick is a verb, then you know that hit is a verb. If you know that run is a verb, then walk is a verb, and so on. And you just keep expanding out and out and out until you've got your class. That's why it works. Not because it's good, but because it's something that students already know. You already know these parts of speech before you ever sit down to learn them.